Improving learning is also a way to make children understand the value of education, make them get interested to go back to school.
As vozes do professor.
أصوات المعلمون.
老師有懷疑.
Teachers' Voices.
Welcome to Teachers' Voices, a podcast made from the stories of teachers from around the world, talking in their own words. I'm your host, Nina Alonso. I'm an educational researcher, and I talk with teachers and learning specialists about the creative ways they tackle the issues they face. In this episode, we are talking about transforming education. In 2022, the United Nations made an urgent call named Transforming Education that resulted in an unprecedented focus of the international community into addressing a global learning crisis due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Keeping alive this spirit of transforming education so that all children can have access to learning, today's episode focuses on initiatives that equip out-of-school children with the basic learning blocks that help them understand the value of learning and eventually be back on track. In this episode, we will hear from Armando Ali, CEO of the People's Action for Learning, PAL for short, talking about citizen-led assessments of learning levels in the Global South and how these assessments can inform actions that help children get back on track. We will also hear from Francis Bizoza, who explains the accelerated learning interventions that are helping out-of-school children to catch up with foundational learning in a refugee camp in the north of Uganda. Finally, we will hear from Koen Verrecht, who shares his experience working with street kids with Mobile School, an initiative that targets the most unprivileged children who are not just out of school but also out of any family protection, living in the streets of different places, including cities in Western countries. We first hear from Armando Ali about the PAL network. The People's Action for Learning, PAL, network is a South-to-South partnership of 17 member organizations working to promote children's foundational learning across Africa, South Asia, and South America. As a researcher, I was involved years ago in a team that developed the PAL network's theory of change. Ever since, I have closely followed the PAL network, and it has become quite dear to my heart. Armando has worked in education from many different standpoints, and including being directly involved with children in the field as an educator, facilitator in Mozambique. Armando picked up my call from his office in Nairobi, Kenya, where the headquarters of the PAL network are located.
The PAL network started from a group of citizens who decided to see if their children were learning. And they went from household to households asking children if they could read a very simple story based on grade 2 textbooks. And the same way, if they could do basic arithmetics based on grade 2. What seemed to be an experience from a small village ended up inspiring more and more citizens, more and more parents from many countries to start what we call today People's Action for Learning. So essentially, we keep the same journey until today.
I asked Armando about the PAL network's understanding of transforming education.
For us, transforming means finding new solutions. Finding new solutions for a huge problem that is affecting the most countries in the global south. When we say finding new solutions, we are recognizing that in the last years, all of us collectively, especially the governments, have been implementing programs that did not result in good learning for our children. Several researches and studies are showing that 20% of children in Africa are out of school, We are talking about a school-going age children in this case. And the current solutions that we see around promoted by governments, they are focused on those children who are in school. So there is something that we need to do differently. There is something that we need to do in a way that will not just solve the previous problem of children not learning, but can also inspire the schools, the education systems, and the parents to find new ways of dealing with the problem of education in the global south. This process of rebuilding the blocks, they need innovation in ways we are engaging children. It needs new forms of accountability between parents, teachers, communities, and the students. And it needs also giving children conditions for them to understand the meaning of learning.
The PAL network journey focuses, on the one hand, on understanding the real learning levels of children by measuring if children are effectively learning how to read and do basic math, and on the other hand, it focuses on engaging citizens, teachers, schools, and local leaders in helping children who might not be going to school or who might not be learning at school to build the foundations of reading and math.
We strongly believe that for children to learn and for children to thrive in life, they need to have the foundations that allow them to build more knowledge on their life, foundations that allow them to learn from others, and especially to learn from what is available in the form of books all over the world. So for them to do that, they need to read. Reading is the starting point to open the world for every child. So reading and doing basic maths are for us the essence that will give children a different world and that will give children opportunities for them to be active citizens in our current world.
Many out-of-school children lose the opportunity to recognize the value in school attendance, and this is something that Francis will tell us more about later. Of the world's 787 million primary school-age children, 10% do not go to school. Armando says that this figure is 20% in the global south and much higher in specific countries and regions.
You know that especially in Africa, 2 out of 10 children are not going to school. And those 2 out of 10 children who are not going to school is not just because the schools are far. That's not the main reason. Many children are not going to schools in places where there are schools, in places where access to school is even for free. And our understanding is that many of them, they don't go to school or they quit from school because they are not getting the benefit of being. They're not understanding why are they spending their time going every day to that building, meeting that woman or man in front of them who at the end of the day is not giving them any concrete gains of their participation in schools.
To understand better, let's explore solutions that can help out-of-school children see the value of learning and be prepared and willing to go back to school. We will hear more about the PAL network later on, but let's now hear about a devoted African expert on teachers' development who works on accelerated learning actions for out-of-school children in a particularly challenging environment, a refugee camp. Francis Bizoza welcomes us in Gulu, in the north of Uganda, where the Palabek refugee camp is. As a refugee settlement, Palabek is not like traditional villages in Uganda, as it is made of provisional houses. Also, Francis explained that Palabek is a very big settlement hosting over 50,000 refugees with farming, food services, schools, and even road construction like we would see in big villages. But in Palabek, many organizations like UN agencies and NGOs and national or local authorities operate to provide services to its huge population, which is composed mainly of children and women. Francis tells me about the children and families that live in the camp.
Yeah, there are many children who have been born in the settlement because this has been there for quite a long time due to the fact that Uganda is neighbored by countries like South Sudan and DRC that have had conflict for so many years. So this settlement is majorly populated with settlers from South Sudan because there was, for example, the war that happened in 2013 and the conflicts that had been there before. So we find that after the war comes down, probably the fathers leave the children in the camp with their mothers and go back to the original countries to try and see part of what they left there, if it still exists, and maybe some of them were employed and they could try to do some work there and then keep coming to check on their families. So you'll find that maybe half family is here in the settlement and half family is back in South Sudan.
Francis has been supporting accelerated learning interventions for out-of-school children in recent months. He's happy to see that the first cohort of children are finishing these interventions by the time this podcast is produced. A new cohort will start soon.
You know, after the COVID-19 pandemic, most of the learners were discouraged to come back to school. And as education innovators, there is need to find teaching approaches that will attract the learners back to school, especially these who come from very vulnerable communities. So I feel our approach or our innovation is doing very well because all the learners that we have are very interested. To an extent, today I was sharing with the program coordinator telling me that when they were closing last term, some students didn't really want to go back home. They wanted to skip learning. So this means it is an intervention or an approach that is interesting for the learners that has encouraged them to learn. They want to keep learning. They want to keep in school. So this is an intervention that I would probably recommend to be replicated even elsewhere because it has proved that it can interest learners to keep learning.
Francis explains how the project works and what his role is. When Armando and Francis talk about grade 1, 2, or grade 3, or P1, P2, and P3, they are referring to primary school grades, which are initially planned for children aged 6 to 7, 7 to 8, and 8 to 9.
I'm developing a branded curriculum that the out-of-school refugee children who were affected by the COVID-19 pandemic and could not go back to their original classrooms because probably some of them had outgrown the classrooms. Others, like the girl child, had fallen victim of early marriage, pregnancy, and stuff. And with all the program we are implementing, we're putting together a curriculum that is more of an accelerated curriculum, whereby those who stopped schooling because of COVID when they are in, let's say, probably P2, P3, and P4. So that curriculum is supposed to help them to catch up. And our major target is for them to enroll back in formal school at the level of maybe, let's say, when they pick interest to enroll back, they can enroll maybe in P5. So the curriculum that we are putting together relies on technology because Learning Equality, the organization that is spearheading the implementation, has a platform called Colibri that is fitted with a lot of resources from across the world. So my role is to outsource and pick out those that suit the needs of our learners here in Uganda and then blend them with academic content from the P3 abridged curriculum of Uganda, then plus social emotional learning sessions which have been put together by another partner organization called Amal Alliance. So it has been designed this way because we are dealing with a vulnerable target group, which is refugee children who have been traumatized before. So it is a unique approach that brings together tech that skills them with digital literacy and then social emotional learning and then the academic content in an approach that is project-based. So I do the curriculum and designing is project-based, and the lessons that the teachers deliver are project-based learning lessons to ensure that we equip the learners with basic numeracy and literacy skills for them to be able to catch up.
4 schools in the Palabek camp have partnered on this project. Interventions can take place twice a week in classrooms at times when the classrooms are not being used for normal curriculum activities. Francis and the teachers implementing the learning interventions are working hard to equip the children with the foundational learning blocks they need to build further learning in the future. The teachers in these interventions are certified teachers who receive specific training for this program.
So we target teaching them basic mathematics to ensure that they have basic mathematics skills and reading skills, numeracy skills. So the lessons that we designed are tailored to achieving those skills. And for example, if we were in a class, you will find that if a teacher is teaching, let's say, addition in the classroom, one of the focuses is to ensure that the teaching is playful but powered by technology. So the learners will have their tablets, but it is playful. So the teacher ensures there is a lot of resources that enhances addition skills in this class, whereby the teacher will ask the learners to add, but they have resources to use to add, and the approach is playful. So you find they have like sticks, they have bottle tops, they have maybe number cutouts that they are going to use in that addition lesson. And then once the teacher has introduced the concept, then they do a few examples, like physically or practically, and then the teacher can refer them to a video resource on their tablet. So the teacher will guide them to log into their accounts on Colibri.
Francis tells me about Colibri, an offline first learning adaptable set of open solutions specially developed to support learning where internet access is an issue.
Colibri is the learning platform that is installed on the tablet. So the teacher will refer the learners to log into their accounts on Colibri, and then they will open the tablet, log into their account, go and watch that learning resource or video which talks about addition, for example, let's say. And then after they watch it, probably they have an activity, either to role play or to use the knowledge they have acquired from the video practically in the classroom as they learn. And then from there, if they are to do an activity or an exercise or a quiz, so it will also be online, then the teacher will again refer them or guide them to log into their account on Colibri to go and do the quiz. So there is activity that is happening physically in the classroom, but there's also activity that is happening on the tablets that the learners are using.
Francis also explains that tablets are shared by peers and that the digital content and technology used in the project allows the teachers to monitor and evaluate the progress and the needs of each student.
Once the teacher has referred the learners to log onto their Colibri accounts and they are maybe watching or reading a book online or doing a quiz, the teacher is able to look at the server on the dashboard and is able to know which learner is doing what, because all the learner accounts are there on the server, and the teacher is able to know this is learner so and so, this is learner so and so. If they're doing a quiz, this is a question they're struggling with, so the teacher can walk to them and guide them and support them to be able to do that quiz properly.
Francis' inspiring story highlights both learning approaches that are engaging for children and the relevance of monitoring and assessing progress that can inform teacher development. Let's hear again from Armando, as his insights are in line with accelerated learning interventions like the ones Francis described, helping out-of-school children in critical contexts to go back to school and continue their education.
So for us, improving learning is also a way to make children understand the value of education, and by doing so, make them get interested to go back to school.
Armando explains that in the Global South, it is also important to assess the children at household and community levels, so teachers, parents, schools, and decision makers can understand the real learning needs of children who might have dropped out, might not be attending schools often, or even going to school but not really learning. Armando tells me about the focus of the PAL network in providing rigorous open source data about learning outcomes that can inform research and practice. The PAL network and its members also use the data that they produce to inform accelerated learning interventions of the kind that Francis described.
From PAL Network's experience, producing data about learning outcomes is essential. We do citizen-led assessment, which is done at household level in the presence of the parents and using very, very simple tools that anyone can understand. The data we produce are public goods. They can be accessed by anyone. They can be used in different forms to support decision makers to understand what is the current situation, but also to support teachers to understand what their children need to do to improve learning. Data produced by PAL Network using citizen-led assessment have been instrumental also to make parents aware of the stage of learning of their children. Many parents assumed that their children were going to school, and by going to school, they were learning. But when we did the assessments at the household, many of them realized that going to school is not necessarily equal to learning. So it engages parents to start thinking on what needs to be done to solve this problem, what needs to be done to make their children learners, and to give sense of the time they spend going to school. Engaging parents and informing the society about the current status of learning globally, and especially focusing on the foundations of reading and numeracy. But the data we produce is also very, very important to inform teachers and volunteers or any other instructors that are working with children to improve their reading and their arithmetic competencies, because this data will tell those teachers or instructors where the children are lacking behind.
Armando also describes a project that the PAL network is developing using citizen-led assessment to inform accelerated learning interventions.
Based on our previous experiences, we thought that it's good to give specific programs that are sufficiently engaging, that are sufficiently motivating for children who are out of school to engage on learning again. So based on the methods that are knowing, like teaching at the right level, methods that are essentially play-based, where children can learn while playing, based also on experiences of other organizations running community libraries and running distance learning programs. We help children to engage and learn the basics of reading and numeracy in order for them to be eligible again to the school systems. And we are doing this using a program that we call My Village, in which we engage the entire village, the teachers, the parents, some volunteers, organizations, civil society organizations essentially, to collectively give support to those children who are not in school to learn and eventually support them to go back to school.
As Francis explained, Armando says that accelerated learning interventions are particularly important for girls who are especially vulnerable when they drop out of the school system. If you want to know more about Francis' accelerated learning interventions for out-of-school refugee children or about the project called My Village that Armando mentioned, you can find links in the show notes of this podcast for more information. Now, before we close this episode, let's remember that the proportion of school-aged children who do not attend school is much higher in the Global South. Koen Verrecht, a previous guest on this podcast, who is now one of BDOB's strategic education advisors working in Vietnam, shared his experience in an organization called Mobile School that develops instructive activities for children living on the streets. In line with Armando and Francis' stories, the organization aims to foster an interest in learning in out-of-school children.
So what's important to know about Mobile School is that the name might be a little bit misleading because it's, of course, not a traditional school as such. It's a blackboard on wheels, and the street workers can take it out on the street and use it as a tool to connect with street kids. But you don't have a traditional school setting, and the idea is not to give actual classes. The idea is really to connect with the kids, to follow their lead. So it's very much like student driven. The street kids really take the ownership of what's happening. Of course, the street workers can prepare certain activities, but usually the materials are designed in such a way that they are very open and flexible to use.
Mobile School train street workers in different cities and countries. These street workers usually work in local organizations and have an existing relationship with children who live in the streets where they operate.
They already have an outreach program on the streets, so usually they have connections with the kids that live there. And now with the Mobile School, they have a new tool to do their work. Like it's a new like a boost for the street work, I would say. But they definitely speak the same language, yeah.
Koen describes an experience he had when he went to train street workers in Mombasa, Kenya.
When we go there, our focus is, of course, on training the street workers. But when we take the schools out on the street, we interact with the children as well, of course. Very often there is a language barrier. But even there, like when we are out with the school on the street, the panels are so easy to work with that it's possible for me, like without using words, to still play games with the street kids. And I think one particular story that would be my best experience at the Mobile School is actually when we were debriefing from one of the first street sessions we did when we were implementing the school in Mombasa in Kenya. And there are a lot of children that use glue as sedative drugs to cope with all the hardship on the street. And therefore they have a lot of concentration problems. I remember that one of the educators during the debrief, she was almost with tears in her eyes, and she was saying, like, these 3 kids, they came to the school and they were so interested in what was happening, and they were asking questions, and they were playing the games, and they were interacting with me and talking to me. And we have been doing all the different panels and all the different games that were on the blackboard for over 1.5 hours. And I have never seen them like so engaged and so motivated and so active during our interactions. So that was like, I remember vividly when she said that, because it really gave me goosebumps.
For Koen, the great impact of these interventions is showing children, rather than imposing them, positive experiences with learning, games, and different activities.
What happens is, if you allow them to be who they are and you respect them and you even give them like very positive experiences, because that's something that they often lack. They are rejected by the society. They are not appreciated. They have very low self-esteem. And with a tool like the Mobile School, they can really get positive experiences, and they can actually start to appreciate themselves, and their self-esteem will grow. And over time, that will help the children or the young adults often to really make different choices than what they would have normally done.
Koen describes the process of starting and developing Mobile School street interventions.
There's an application process, and then there's a prospection visit where we do some first trainings. But then, like, if everything goes according to plan, after some time, there will be an actual implementation training. And that's when we visit the organization for 2 weeks. We take the Mobile School with us for the first time, and all the panels. So there are over 250 different panels that you can use on the school. And then we have a 2-week training with the organization to get them started with the Mobile School project. And the trainings, they focus on, there's different areas of focus every day, but a big part of it is creativity and educational games and using the panels. And then, of course, we first practice it in like the safe environment of the organization. But after a few days, we also really take it out on the streets and see how are the kids responding to it, how are the educators responding to it.
It is tough to hear about the harsh realities of children living on the streets.
And what we encourage street workers to do with the mobile school is really to just engage in the conversation, to build a relationship with the street kids, but always respecting their own boundaries. And it doesn't really make sense to ask street kids to not sliff glue at the mobile school, for example, because then they will just not come anymore. And that's end of story.
Koen's story, like Francis, tell us about caring and respectful approaches and innovative solutions that can offer new opportunities for the most vulnerable children around the world. Our efforts transforming education can be inspired by the stories shared by people directly working with teachers and children, as they all stress the importance of learning and teaching approaches that make learning interesting and fun, so that children actually can value learning and finally think it is worth going to school. More teachers and better prepared teachers are needed for transforming education. These stories also emphasize the relevance of teachers' development programs that give teachers and facilitators the tools and learning that they need to help children stay on track and motivated. Thank you for listening to Teachers' Voices, produced in partnership with Bold, the digital platform for learning and development. If you have enjoyed this episode, you will also like our episode on gender equality, as it explores in more depth gender-responsive education. Our episode on best practices for building strong foundational skills and better education systems also shed lights in some of the issues that we talked about here. And I also invite you to explore Teachers' Voices episodes about learning through play, as they also share inspiring stories about playful learning shared by teachers working with different school ages and contexts. You can find more about our guests in this podcast on bold.expert and in the show notes.